I'm S.A. Bradley, and welcome to Hellbent for Horror, a podcast devoted to all things related to horror, where I remind you that you used to love horror movies, and you secretly still do. In Alfred Hitchcock's Psycho, Norman Bates famously said, "We all go a little mad sometimes." But for some of us, going a little crazy is just the time when things start getting fun. Of course, I'm not talking about the stabby eating bugs kind of mad. I'm talking more about the crazy that makes your neighbors shake their heads as you start decorating for Halloween in August. Madness, mania, fanaticism, call it what you like. I like to call it passion, and I have always been drawn to people who aren't satisfied to just be spectators. Their passion compels them to create. It might be as simple as a fanzine, or as complicated as a feature film, or as idiosyncratic as cosplay, but it is fueled by passion. And usually, what they create looks crazy to the average person, but to those it speaks to, it is a beautiful gift. And today, my guest is Jay Michaels, an independent stage and film producer, director, and actor. Jay is also the host and associate producer of Phoenix FearCon, a community-driven horror event being held this October 15th and 16th at Sun Studios in Tempe, Arizona. Now, what started as a film festival in 2006 has become a celebration of independent filmmakers and artists and their fans. It's an interactive event that showcases the creative process, including the obstacles that independent artists face. The goal is to uncover new talent and to have the horror community grow together. And of course, have a ton of fun while doing it. And I'm going to be there doing live podcasts and taking in the madness at this Phoenix FearCon, October 15th and 16th. And Jay Michaels, thank you so much for being on the show.
My absolute pleasure. Oh, you have such a good voice. No wonder you're famous. Oh, my gosh, you sound great.
Well, thank you so much for the kindness. As if you don't have a great voice, too. That's what's wonderful about it.
Thank you.
So I always start the show with everybody that I talk to kind of the same way, but also, I wanted to address that what I've been doing for the last couple months is talking about passion and talking to people who just went down some really interesting paths, people who created drive-ins, bought an old drive-in and decided to do the kind of stuff that we do, and people who just can't help but perform. And looking at you, and knowing you from our conversations around this festival, I can tell that you're someone who's been enjoying performance for a long time. But I like to talk about horror as well, because it's this nugget that people tend to have happen to them when they're really young. So I call it the first kiss with horror. What was the one movie that you saw when you were a kid that was the first kiss? It brought you down this road to ruin. It may not have been a favorite. It was just one that really impacted you.
Okay, to answer that correctly, I would say there are two. The first one is the first horror film I ever saw, which was The Mummy's Hand with Tom Tyler.
Oh, wow.
I saw it on a dare, and up until that point, I was terrified of horror films. I never watched a horror film. I scared so easily. But I was in second grade, and it's a long and complicated story, but I was one of the group of board eraser monitors. And every Monday, we would go down to the basement of the public school and clean the erasers for our particular classrooms. And the conversation there around the board eraser machine was what was on Creature Features that Saturday. And I never watched it, and I would always lie. They would talk about the movie, and I would just go, "Oh, yeah, oh, sure. Oh, very scary. Yeah, oh, I remember that. Great scene," just to belong. And one day someone called me on it. One of the other little second graders said, "I don't think you watch any of these." And so I was challenged. And that Saturday night, I had to gird my loins and watch Creature Features. And because I was trying to prove a point, I learned that movie backwards and forwards. I watched every detail of that movie. I bought my first issue of Famous Monsters of Filmland so that I could learn more of these movies. So I got there the next Monday and I said, "Oh, yeah, it was The Mummy's Hand with Tom Tyler, and it was Universal." And I could do the music, da, 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 and I motioned how the mummy walked, and I knew his name was Caris, and I became like one of the stars of our little group. And it so turned me on to it that I watched the next movie and the next movie and the next movie. But if I can pick one movie that I'll call my first kiss, it was my first Hammer film that I ever saw, which was Horror of Dracula with Christopher Lee and Peter Cushing. I had seen photos of that throughout Famous Monsters and some other books I had read, but I never saw the movie. And there it was one night on like Channel 7 at 2:00 in the morning. And I watched it, and I was so taken with the music and the gothic effect and the fine acting on the part of Peter Cushing. And I loved it so much. I needed to know more about Hammer films. I needed to know more about horror movies. And it was at that point that I said, okay, this is not a hobby. This is a relationship. And this is when I decided I want to know about these actors, about these film companies, what it took to do them. And it's been a 50+ year journey since then.
I love that Hammer films just do that. And that one in particular felt so insanely, I don't want to say violent, but the way that Christopher Lee came off as the vampire there was such an intensity to that, like a real primal animalistic thing that I don't think that you always got, especially not with Lugosi. Lugosi had that restrained thing, but there was something really kind of crazy about how Hammer did that. They were very comic booky in that primary colors kind of thing. That Kensington gore had that certain look, at the eyes that had that reddish color in the irises and stuff. And the whites of the eyes were actually pink.
Christopher Lee hated that makeup. The red contact lenses gave him problems with his eyes. The fangs themselves bothered his teeth. He was a mess from it, but it made him a star, if you will. Hammer Films, not many people know this, but the first two of their horror series, Curse of Frankenstein and Horror of Dracula, were rated X in the 1950s because of what they considered too much sexuality and gore. Nowadays, they're high art and they're somewhat tame.
Yeah, that shot in the face in Frankenstein. That was kind of the shot heard around the world where we see Kensington gore for the first time seeping through the fingers.
Most definitely.
What I think is really intriguing that you talk about, and it's something of our age, right? That we could be fans of films and not see them. And I was just on an interview show myself as a guest, and they were talking to me about how was this the best time in the world to see horror films? Is this the best time for horror? I said, well, I think every time is basically the best time because it's the furthest out that we've been able to go. But when I was growing up in the 80s, having VCRs and cable was such a light year change from when I was a kid, and I would rent library books. And I would see pictures of movies that I had never seen and burn those pictures into my brain as if I had seen the film until I saw it.
I did the same thing. Sure.
And you're just kind of like it's almost like a fugue state when you finally do see the film, because it's like this picture has come to life. And I remember seeing the moments that they decided to have as stills. And I'm like, that's a very strange moment to suddenly make so cataclysmic when all this other stuff is happening in the film. But
it's ironic you say that. As much as yes, today and since the days of VCR, of course, we can see whatever we want. So it's this abundance. But for me back then, I think it was better because then it was real art. You saw this image in a magazine or a book, and you had to hunt that film down. It became this need. And also, I became so much more literate because of it. If I saw a picture, I wanted to know about that movie. I wanted to know about the studio. I wanted to know about these actors. By the time I actually saw the movie, I knew what Peter Cushing enjoyed. I knew that Peter Cushing on the set of Curse of Frankenstein had apples and cheese as a snack. Because it was in so many different books. I could quote them, what they said behind the camera to each other. It became so much richer. It's like nowadays, if you want to find a Picasso, you have to go to a museum. You can't just get it. And I think back then, horror movies were Picassos. You had to find them. You had to go to the midnight cinema or stay up till 4 a.m. It was a journey back then, which I somewhat miss.
That's one of the things that I mentioned. I said I had to give it to the people who the books that I was reading, that they actually sat in a cinema. Somehow they found a way to watch these movies many, many times, to be able to see where the form cuts were, to notice these things, to be able to fetishize them in a way to put them down on paper. And we didn't have that. I mean, you literally, I guess you had to go to film school, or you needed to know someone who was at the movie theater. Somehow you'd be able to get a print to be able to watch the film enough times, or just take so many notes that you had a near photographic memory to do these books. It's a really interesting thing. And I talk about this as well, which I'll ask your opinion. There were certain books. You mentioned Famous Monsters. For me, it was Famous Monsters, Starlog, Cinefantastique, and Fangoria as the outlier. I often look at those books and I go, I think an entire generation was steered in a certain way to the proclivities of a few people, kind of like film critics would tell you what movies were the greatest films of the 70s and steered the 70s in a certain direction. I think the horror journalists at that time, Bob Martin and folks like that, and Forey, because they adored certain films and they showcase those, they became part of the lexicon. Like, I don't think Dark Shadows, would Dark Shadows still be remembered if it wasn't so fetishized in some of the magazines that I read?
And the comic books.
Yeah.
Gold Key Comics was very aggressive in grabbing the horror film stars of that era. You had Boris Karloff's Thriller became a comic book.
Yes.
Dark Shadows. I knew it as a couple of photos in Famous Monsters of Filmland, but I got to know it from the Gold Key Comics. So literarily speaking, whether you're talking magazines, books, or even comic books, that's where it was point A for so many people.
Yeah. So I'm really interested in the progression. How does someone such as yourself, an actor, writer, and they find themselves suddenly tied and tethered to a live convention for a weekend? It seems like, it's kind of like saying one day you really like animals and the next day you're building a zoo. So you're suddenly appearing in this thing that's just like this huge event. And now you're the host, but you seem to be very, very active in what goes on in this convention. So how did you get involved with this? What was the progression, the motivation?
I'm self-taught in everything I do. I'm a professor of communications, but it all started because ironically, I needed horror movies to help me break my Bronx accent so I could become a better speaker. I have done a lot of Shakespeare in my life, and not because I studied it. I have obviously eventually studied it, but the beginning it was just like, oh, look, there's lots of ghosts and right. Ghouls in Shakespeare. So I'm an immersive, obsessive individual, which is a flaw and a positive trait, I guess. When I enjoy something, I want to enjoy every part of it. I want to be able to say, "Oh yes, I know all about it," whatever that know all about it is. And in my youth, myself and my best friend Joel Eisenberg, we collected magazines. We went to these conventions as kids. We studied all of these monsters and. Both of us, ironically, we recently came together after 40 years for a television program about horror movies. So I saw my old buddy again after all this time. But to get back to your question, basically what I did was I immersed myself in it. And when the time came when I got older and everybody, and of course horror movies maintain its own stereotype of being, oh, that's cheesy, that's B picture. That's changing now, which I'm thrilled with. But so for years, it just became my secret hobby, but I've always collected. I've always been part of it. I've always gotten to know as much about them just for my own sake. And then when very recently, about 3 or 4 years ago, I immersed myself in this. As I mentioned, Joel hired me to do a program called Terror TV, where I would speak to horror genre actors and directors and writers about their films. And so I got back into it now on a professional level. And I immersed once again, and I loved it. And again, okay, I got to know this actor, but I want to know these actors. I've gotten to know this film. Now I want to know the franchise. I've gotten to know this author. Let me read all his books. Let me read all her books. Let me see all of this material. So when I met Chris McLennan on the set of Terror TV, she said, "I'm doing Phoenix FearCon. Do you want to be part of it?" And I have to tell you, it was like a flashback. one dream that I had as a kid. I went to the very first two Famous Monsters of Filmland conventions, and there was Forey Ackerman holding court and chatting with these stars. And I met Peter Cushing at one of these. And in the back of my brain, I said to myself, one day I want to be standing where he is doing this. So when Chris said, do you want to host FearCon? I'm 12 again. The reason I'm so immersed in this, the reason I love this so much, I'm 12 again. If there is a fountain of youth, I'm going to it, and it's in Phoenix. It's in Tempe, Arizona, in October. Just to be 12 again and be there with all of these people and hanging out like I saw Forey do 40 plus years ago. It's a dream come true. It really is a dream come true.
I'm now completely green with envy. Wow.
and ironically, it's paid off immensely. I'm going to be lecturing on Mask of the Red Death at a university very shortly. I'm writing a book on the socio-political ramifications within horror movies.
Yes.
I host my own program. I have a YouTube channel, and there's a program on there called Horror-storian, where I'm hosting that, and I meet celebs in the industry. And I got that title, Horror-storian, from Boston Sci-Fi. I have served on their committees, and I have hosted a few of their events. I've been part of their panels on for that convention, for the Phantasm Con. I was part of. This has become an occupation as well as a total obsession and total fun. So I'm having a blast.
I love that you talk about it being an obsession, a good creative obsession. But I also love that you said you go back to being 12, because what I think that horror does for us, it allows us this handshake with the shadow and all of that. But there's also the sense of play, that even when you're talking about something that seems so dreadful and disturbing to the non-horror fan, it's very hard to not enjoy yourself through this. There is a sense of humor that you kind of get from being around the macabre all of the time. And I love also that you talk about what I call a potato chip effect. I can't just hear about one thing. Once I start talking about an actor, if I'm watching a movie and I see the same actor, a character actor, I'm like, oh, that guy's very interesting. What's he been in before? You need to go that way. For me, it was when I was a kid, I was in a lot of trouble. So I was given a set of encyclopedias while I was grounded, and I just read them. I just would go from one thing to the next one. It would say, see also, I would see also. And so I was kind of trained in that way, that once I was really excited by something, I will annoyingly try to kill it with all of the energy that I have at my disposal to learn as much as I can. And I think that's really fun. Something that I did want to ask was if you were someone who was into conventions as a kid, and it sounds like you most certainly were if you ended up meeting Forey Ackerman. And I mean, Peter Cushing, that's like one of those things that if I could have him genetically sealed somewhere so that I could meet him one last time, I would love to, because that's one of my favorites. Obviously, never got to meet him.
He was the nicest man. I'm a sweaty little 12-year-old, and I'm terrified because there is Dr. Frankenstein. There is Dr. Van Helsing right in front of me. And firstly, he wrote me the nicest note that I have on a frame on my office wall. And like any little kid, if you will, I extended my hand and shaking, and I said, "You're one of the greatest actors in the world." And you'd think he'd roll his eyes or something. He looked me dead in the eyes and he goes, "Well, you're one of the people that put me there." Extended his hand. He said, "Nice to meet you." That was it for me. To this day, I tell that story innumerable times because he was such a gentleman, and he was such really a brilliant actor. I saw he did Orwell's 1984. He did a television film of it in the 50s, and he was stunning in it. And Christopher Lee, for all people laugh about his Dracula, I never considered him Dracula. It's funny you say that. I've considered him Vlad the Vampire because of what you said, his brute force. He was brilliant in so many of the works he's done. They were really brilliant actors. And I think them and Peter Cushing, and it goes back to something I wrote once for an article. The greatest Shakespearean actors make the greatest horror film actors because their imaginations go that wide. You mentioned people who don't particularly like horror films. I think if you open your mind and see that it's not a horror film, it's a nightmare. You're watching someone's nightmare, someone's worry, someone's terror. And when you do that, they become very cathartic. You'll watch a horror film and, okay, it's zombies, but maybe it's also the worry of poverty. Maybe it's also the worry of commercialism. It's a vampire. Okay, is it a vampire or is it your fear of growing old and dying? Is it a monster or is it the Frankenstein monster, or are you afraid of being an outcast? There's such psychological depth to a well-done movie that if people really just sat there and looked at the horror movie for what it is, and I think they are starting to, it would be a different world. I think that's the reason that, and I mentioned this to you when I spoke to you, that's the reason The Shape of Water won the Academy Award. All it is the creature from the Black Lagoon, but he gets the girl. But finally, we're in a world where we're going to say, okay, the outcast deserves love also, and it made it that much easier. So they're just amazing people in these films. So and it's amazing movies.
Well, that's great that you mention all of that, because I talk about the metaphor that there is. And I encourage people to look at horror the same as you would German expressionism. There's that same exact thing of where you take the internal struggle, the thing that you can't quite articulate, and the monster becomes the metaphor. You don't, the set itself becomes the metaphor. So, and we're talking about this. And when I talk about horror, I talk about how it serves a role in our culture. It allows us that safe handshake with the shadow, but also with that metaphor where we can talk about things in our culture that sometimes we can't speak to directly. If we do, it smells like burning tire fires. We need that ability to have that distance between. What do you think? We're talking about with metaphors and monsters now. What do you think that they stand for now? And what do you think that we'll know about them when the dust settles? I mean, do you think that we know what our metaphors are now? Or do you think that we have to have the distance of time to be able to figure out, oh, that's what we were really freaked out about?
I think it's, if you look at it like we look at a film, you can get it immediately. You can look and say, okay, yes, it's a monster, but who is the monster, quote unquote? Yeah. But in general, the general public, I think it's the distance of time. You can look at a movie years, decades later, and it has a brand new meaning. Like I said, the Hammer films were one step above porn in the 50s because people couldn't imagine going to a certain level, but now they're high art. Now they're considered high art. If you look at Nosferatu, you're talking German expressionism. If you look at Nosferatu, the way they describe the vampire in that, he's not a vampire, he's a plague. Yeah. And there are sequences where they're very eerie and scary today because people are hiding in their homes. They're putting masks over their face so they don't breathe in anything. It's about animals that are spreading these plagues. There are rats involved. And when you think about it, they were just a scant time past the 1918 pandemic. So that was fresh in their heads. So when you look at it from that angle, they were still in the nightmare of their plague. And when you look at it from today's standards, you see an eerie correlation to what's going on today. Yeah. I think my favorite is the movie Contagion, if we're talking plagues. If people just watched that movie and said, it could happen. If people had that brain and said this could happen, maybe it wouldn't have happened because that movie reads like a documentary today. Oh, yeah. I think it's the distance of time for the general public because there is still it's a monster movie. When you think of a detail, there was a book I read called The Horror Film Reader, which analyzed at that point leading horror movies. And one point they brought up was Freddy Krueger. At the height of his popularity, the Freddy Krueger glove and hat were the leading Halloween costume for children. Right. Now, if you think about a character that is a child molester, absolutely, what parent is buying for their little kid a Halloween costume of a child molester? Yeah. I don't think they realize the impact of that character. I think now we do. But, it blows my mind that horror films get knocked down so much for what they like to be called, but we live in a world where symbolism matters so much that people will misread symbols. You're talking about Freddy Krueger, a child molester. I've always been confused by that. I love the character in the way that it's done in the first film. It's another reason why I have a laissez-faire feeling about sequels, because they constantly denature the horror because they answer more questions. And I think
think the unknown's important, but it also denatured this vicious character that was in the first film.
Yeah.
But you also have things like even Born in the USA, the song by Bruce Springsteen. It was a protest song in a way. It was being very critical, and yet everybody was singing it because they heard the symbol of Born in the USA. Those words were the only ones that they were listening to, and they literally kind of changed how that song was perceived, no matter what the protests were of the artist. And I think that happens a lot with horror. It gets misunderstood for what it is. I think there's also always been folks like us. There's more of us. The geeks are starting to inherit the earth, where we can look at things and say, oh, well, I see the symbolism. You mentioned Nosferatu. I always love talking about Caligari, because Caligari is like this amazing look at taking, we're in the middle of reparations from the war. People are starving to death. 700,000 Germans die of starvation because the government falls apart, the economy falls apart, and inflation, because they just keep making money, goes through the roof and people can't eat. So they're completely demoralized. And they've got these people in charge, these figureheads that are telling them that everything's going to be okay somehow. And then you have this strange movie that looks like nothing that's ever been before it, where you have shadows that are twisted and mountains that are going like this, and the buildings are curved, and there's just a slash of light. And it's like every upset about what is happening to their world that has been twisted is suddenly painted on literal scenes for this film. And I think that if you're talking about anything that really gives you the thumbprint of what a horror film is going to feel like, as well as look like, Nosferatu and Caligari, these two expressionism films, really take it down this path. And I love that we're talking about this kind of thing, because I look at horror kind of like Frank's hot sauce, goes with any genre, and
completely,
it just works and makes everything kind of a little bit better. What's your favorite hybrid horror mix? Do you find that there's something that you really find, if there's a movie that mixes horror and science fiction, you're in, or horror western, horror comedy?
I'm going to agree with you on the hot sauce, and I put hot sauce on everything. And so I think horror, if horror as a concept, can be put so quickly into films. Recently, my wife and I have been watching several Fellini films. And when you really watch Fellini, yes, he's considered a genius. You look at some of his movies from certain angles, they're horrifying. Yes, they're absolutely horrifying. The use. Pardon me, I can't remember. I can't remember the Night of Cabrini or Night of Cambria.
Night of Cabria. Yeah.
Cabria, thank you. Pardon me, I couldn't remember the name of him. Laugh at me. I didn't think I was going to talk about Fellini. Oh my gosh.
This is what happens here.
What a good show this is. Anyway, in watching it, in what happens to this woman in this film is horrific. One of Fellini's films, which is supposedly based on his life, is as eerie as any horror film possibly could be. I think a really good filmmaker is not making a horror movie, but a movie that horrifies. Yeah. I'm going to contradict Boris Karloff slightly. He said, I don't call them horror films, I call them terror films, because I'm out to horrify no one. I actually think we are horrifying people. That's the point of them. We're making them go, oh my God, I can't believe that happened. And that is not what they see in the movie. It's not the alien creature coming down. It's the feeling that they get. It's what's happening to the people in them. And I think when you inflict horror into movies, if you're talking hybrid, that's where the movie takes a brand new level. Jordan Peele now, they say he's making horror movies. He's not. He's making movies that horrify. His film Get Out, yes, it's very Frankensteinian in nature, but if you look at it from the messages he's giving, it's a horrifying message. So for me, it's not so much saying, oh, I like when horror is combined with something else. I like when horror is put into something. Take that hot sauce and put it in a rom-com and tell me what the movie looks like. Put that hot sauce in a drama, in a comedy, in a musical. I saw Sweeney Todd, The Demon Barber of Fleet Street, on Broadway, and that's a horror movie with music, period.
Oh, yes. Assassins as well.
Assassins, another perfect example. The Sweeney Todd on Broadway was so brilliant. I had never directed anything until that point. I was an actor at that point. And when I saw Sweeney Todd, I grabbed the playbill and I'm flipping through it and I said, who directed this? Who directed this? Who created this? Who created this? And from that point on, I became obsessive and wanted to direct theater and then cinema. So it's when you put the horror into something, that's, you know what? It's like drinking. You take that one drink, and I'm not saying alcoholism or anything like that. I'm not saying obsessive drinking or anything, but the one drink, something changes in you, and you add that one horror in it, and that's that glass of wine that changes everything.
Yeah, I love that you brought up Fellini. I was just on another show where we talked about Altman, Three Women, which is a really subtle horror film. And I love, or a movie that horrifies. I love movies that people don't necessarily see the horror in, and I see what they're trying to go for. Another one is Bergman, right? Hour of the Wolf is about as close to a horror film as you can get. Seventh Seal tends to be something that you could look at in that fashion as well.
Oh, yeah.
Very, very, very subtle, but dark. I mean, it's not subtle at death is playing chess, but the ending is what really makes that a horror film. It could be, a fantasy up until you realize that death knew every chess move, was just kind of humoring this guy as he's going back to his village.
Yeah.
And that's where it's like, you didn't beat death. You didn't even slow death down. It gave you that moment that made you feel like he gave me a good shot. Okay, let's go. And that to me is really some of the great bits that you get out of horror. I think that feeling that you get in the heart and in the chest when you're watching a good horror movie, when you get to the end, what the energy is or what the emotion is that they want you to go home with is just as important as what the content is, whether it's a horror film or not. That's how I felt when I saw Get Out. I was like, wow, I have some stuff to munch on. I mean, I had a lot. Yeah,
exactly.
So we were talking about horror so much so far. And when I go to conventions, my favorite thing about going to conventions is the conversations that start. I usually don't get to bed till 2 or 3 o'clock in the morning because I end up at the bar afterwards and everybody just sits and talks. So what do you think makes the subject of horror so compelling that the conversations never die down?
People want to feel alive in this world. We are given so many reasons to not feel alive. How can I put this? Things are done for us, and with automation or whatever, we don't feel like we're there in the action anymore. We feel put on the side, I think, or at least I do many times. And I think a horror movie, you must scream, you must laugh, you must cry, you must feel alive. There was a great line in Battlestar Galactica, the reboot of the TV series. One of the characters, and the line came out of nowhere. They're being attacked by the Cylons, boom, 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 the normal sci-fi. And one of the characters looked at the captain and said, "Captain, this is terrible. This is what's happening. Going down, all these terrible things." And he says, "But I never felt so alive."
Yeah.
And you'd think it's a silly line, but it really got to me because I think that's what horror films do. When you see this, you are there. You are the monster, or you're the hero, or you're the victim. You're whatever. You will scream. You will yell. You will talk back to the screen. You will cry. You will laugh. You will gasp. When you exit it, you have been on a journey.
Yeah.
And the joy is the journey is individual to everyone. I can see a horror film and laugh uproariously. Someone else could see a horror film and be repulsed, and vice versa. So when you come out of it, like you say, I have gone to many a diner, many a bar, many a restaurant, and said, "Oh no, when he comes through the door, that's not what he wants." And we're hours discussing simply one line of the movie. It just really connects you to people, and it connects you to yourself. I don't think most movies anymore connect you to yourself the way a horror film does.
Right. That's excellent. That's an excellent point. And connecting to yourself and others is really intriguing to me. And really intriguing is where you mentioned you could be the monster or you could be the hero. I talk about how a horror allows us to have this handshake with that shadow part of us, that little primal area that many people don't want to look at until it's a little bit too late. So what do you feel that horror may have done for you in that? Is there anything that helped you through some stuff? Did you find that horror kind of transformed a fear into a thrill?
Everything in my life, when I sit and pensively think about my youth, every formative thing I had a horror movie attached to it in some strange way. I had a very thick, very pronounced Bronx accent when I was a kid, and I talked like this, and I just couldn't go through life like this. And we didn't have speech classes, ironically, like I teach today. You had only if you had a severe impediment was there a speech class for it. So I watched the old British horror movies and learning to speak, laugh at me, like Christopher Lee or Vincent Price or Peter Cushing. I do a mean Vincent Price, as I know you do. We did that last time. It formulated me as a person. Suddenly, I looked at myself and said, how would Dr. Van Helsing dress? How would the Count behave in this situation? It gave me another way of learning. I'll simply leave it and say that I had an odd family. I had a very disconnected family. And so a lot of what I had to learn in life, I had to learn by myself. And I learned it by emulating these Gothic characters, these very strong characters, these passionate characters. It's gotten me through so much, and also on a certain, I guess it's surreal level. When I have been my lowest, and there were times, I'd say to myself, well, wait a minute. He survived a zombie apocalypse. I can get through this situation at school. He's going through, he was able to vanquish the vampires. I can at least live through this breakup. It sounds silly to say it, but when you don't have someone who's going to put their arm around you and say, okay, let's talk, to see someone battle something so outlandishly bigger than what you're going through allows you that second to say, no, I'll survive. I'll get through it.
There's a lot of people that I know. It's something that I talk about a lot when I have a gathering with somebody, that when I go to horror conventions, so many of the people that I meet are either going through stuff that's really rough now and they're really piling in on the horror and it's helping them, or they had a really miserable first act. The first part of their lives was really a challenge. And they've got this second act that is really turning into something great. And it's not as if horror itself is the only reason that they're doing better now, but it is one of the additives. It's something that allowed them. I mean, we talk about metaphor, we talk about symbolism. Nothing says that you can't take a real world problem and make it a little less painful by wrapping it in a symbol, wrapping it in a metaphor. Completely. So I found that that worked for me in many times in my life. So I love that a lot of times the people that I meet at horror conventions, which are people who aren't into them, would think it was a glum lot, and it's not at all. We tend to laugh a lot. We tend to enjoy. We're pretty obsessive about stuff, and it's this moment to be able to let your hair down, so to speak, and let this part that you don't get to really show other people in the normal world. You get to have a weekend where you just kind of just let it all hang out. And I think that's always intriguing. And we're having this one, the 15th and the 16th, real close to Halloween. Do you find that this kind of thing, doing this, does it denature October for you? Does it make it like, oh, Halloween, geez, or do you somehow keep that spirit up?
Oh, it doesn't denature it at all. It's funny, for 7 years in a row, I did A Christmas Carol on tour with a theatrical company. And Christmas wasn't Christmas until I could play Scrooge 3 times a day for 4 weeks and discover the meaning of Christmas each and every time with a brand new audience. If anything, it enhanced that message. And I go to these innumerably. I go to comic book conventions as well. And each and every one is different in the sense there's another moment that you have, there's another person that you meet. And you had mentioned about meeting these people. I think that even helps it more because we see them on the screen in a certain way. Now we meet them for real. And they're nice people. They talk about Boris Karloff being this great guy. And recently I had several conversations with Bill Oberst Jr., who plays these really dark characters, but he's a lovely, lovely man. And again, it's almost this parable you have. You meet these people and you say, wait a minute, it's not a murderer, it's a great guy. Okay. And suddenly you feel great about yourself, and there they are, friendly to you. And it doesn't make it boring to me. For me, it makes it that much more exciting because there's another page I'm going to read. There's another person I'm going to meet. There's someone else. There's something else that's going to make my obsession, my passion for it even stronger.
Great. So talking about Halloween, for me, going to conventions and stuff is almost like a ritual. You're going to go there, you go to this cathedral and all this. And I think that Halloween in and of itself, I have several different rituals. So I'll see if you have any of them. Do you have anything that you do yearly that is like your own thing? Like I watched this movie, or I have a Halloween music playlist. These songs must be played. You have anything like that?
Yes and no. I don't have particular ones, but every year I need to watch a new film or two. Lately, these last few years that I've been doing it with FearCon and several other venues, I'm ODing on movies, and it's wonderful. But every Halloween, I say to myself, either I need to see a movie I haven't seen in years, or I need to see a brand new movie. I need to find something interesting, different to watch. So even if it's 1 or 10, I have to sit down and say, I've never seen that. Now's the time to see it. And it's that much more fun. It's almost like everyone watched the 10 Commandments every year on a certain holiday. And it's the same thing here. It's like, okay, it's October. What's on? I never saw that Karloff film. I need to see that.
I love that kind of thing. I tend to watch something new. I have to try and find something new. And luckily at this point, there are so many different venues, avenues for you to find something that you haven't seen. What I love about horror is I don't care how encyclopedic you are. There's something you haven't seen. There's a river tributary that you have not gone down. You have not paddled your way through. And that's how it is for me. And yet every Halloween, when everything is done, because I do a huge, I'm just ridiculous. I do a huge decoration of the house, music, all this stuff. People come from all around to see this thing, which means I don't sleep from like the end of August until November something or other. But I end every night with Phantasm. I just have to sit there after everything else is done. I need to have that feeling of Phantasm come over me. That first note that comes on when you're looking at the title, black on red on black. And everything about that movie, I don't know what it is. You know, you could sit there and say there are plenty of movies that make more sense. There are plenty of movies that were made better, whatever you want to say, but there's something specific to that film that no matter what anybody says about it, it doesn't matter, bounces off of me. That movie just indelibly works for me.
I got to tell you, I'm so glad you said that. I inundated myself in the 80s, obviously, with that genre of film, the slasher, the films of the 80s. And so I saw them all. And when I got to Phantasm, when I watched Phantasm, I said, wait a minute, this is different. This is something special. And I loved it so much. And a couple of years ago, I got a chance to interview Reggie Bannister. And he's the nicest guy. He and his wife, Gigi, lovely people. And to talk to him about that movie. And then very recently, I get on the phone. Hello. Hi, this is Michael Baldwin. And to talk to these people about Phantasm, to be able to connect with them. For me nowadays, that's the thing. I saw these movies, loved them, idolized them. Now to see the reality to them, absolutely incredible. So I'm a kindred spirit of yours when it comes to Phantasm.
Yeah. Oh, I love it. I got to speak with Coscarelli a few years ago at a convention, and he was really, really cool. And I went to him and I said, it's a very strange thing. I'm a big Phantasm fan, and I don't know why it's hard to be a Phantasm fan in this world. Like there's so many people like, oh, Freddy Krueger, oh, Jason. But if you mention Phantasm, like, oh, unless you're a Phantasm fan. I said, I don't know why, because this is one of the smarter films. It's one of the more challenging films.
That's
it's
why.
special and unique. Yeah. And he's
That
like,
is
yeah,
why.
I hear you, my friend. And so I started talking to him about influences. I just kind of mentioned Nicholas Roeg because Don't Look Now and stuff. And I said, there are these things that you do, which is time is not linear in Phantasm. There are these things that change. You have these shots that are, and he just starts smiling. He goes, yeah, this whole thing of them playing guitar and then putting the fingers on the tuning fork, and then later that is replayed. And just the idea that we are compressing time at certain points, we're extending time. He's like, yeah, I love those art films. He goes, the horror art films like Nicholas Roeg, that was the stuff that when I was a kid, I wanted to try and aspire to. So I love that continues to, we influence each other. The artists influence each other.
Don't get me wrong. I love Freddy Krueger. I love Freddy Krueger.
Yeah.
I think Robert Englund, absolutely a brilliant character. But you're right about Phantasm. The thing that makes Phantasm an acquired taste is it's so intellectual. You're talking other dimensions. You're talking eerie characters. You're talking the tall man. If we're talking about a particular monster. So the notion of there's a commerciality to Nightmare on Elm Street, to Friday the 13th, and anyone can get involved with that. But it takes a real connoisseur of the art to say, okay, let's find Phantasm.
Yeah. And Phantasm, another thing that's so great about it is that it's still super accessible as well. It may have these pinings to it, but I think that one of the reasons that I truly connected to it was I saw people that were me on the screen. This was a certain demographic that wasn't being seen that often in films. You had, I wouldn't say a 90201 thing, but there was a certain level of teenager that you always saw. It was kind of like pH of 7. Everything was pretty average. Whereas you had these people in Phantasm who sat out on the porch playing guitar, drinking Dos Equis. They were motorheads. They had a big muscle car. They had rifles on the mantle and they would say things like, "You don't point a gun at anybody unless you intend to kill them and intend to shoot them. And if you shoot them, you better kill them." That's kind of stuff that my uncles and stuff would say. There's the moment where Michael Baldwin's walking around in denim jacket, right? That's a very specific thing of a certain time, of a certain type of person. And so when he's going down the sidewalk and he goes into the phone booth and he fishes his fingers in the change display to see if he could find somebody left an errant quarter or something, very specific of a time, but it's also very real. And what I think was interesting about Phantasm as well is that it was almost as if you were seeing a demographic that didn't normally get represented, even though it was, lower class maybe, or something like that, white guys. It still was a look that wasn't seen very often at that point and felt very authentic.
It was ordinary. We are, by the way, and you will meet him. Reggie Bannister is going to be at FearCon this year. We created an award called the Reggie, which honors those that have upheld the genre passionately all their lives. And Lloyd Kaufman, the founder of Troma Entertainment, is getting it. And that was the thing that got me about Reggie Bannister. Here was this guy, balding, and he's trying to salvage it with the ponytail. And he's an ice cream truck driver. He's this regular guy who saves the planet. Yeah. He wasn't, and you're right, every horror film, especially in the 80s, they're all gorgeous. Everybody's gorgeous. And no, I did not look that way in the 80s. I don't look that way now. So I'd watch these films. I say, okay, I guess the gorgeous people save the day. Nope. The regular people in movies like the Phantasm series, it's regular people. It's this little guy. It's Michael Baldwin, who's a kid then. Yeah. It was these regular people that find out what's going on and save the world. So I think what made it so great is, aside from the fact that it's so bloody cerebral, oh my gosh, you can read into the silver ball. You can read into the pylons turning people into these slaves. So much symbolism in them, just by the fact it's this regular guy who combs his hair with a towel is saving the day. And I think that's for me. I think I didn't realize it then. But now I look back and I say, yeah, of course, the regular guy is the one that's going to save the world. And even in that, you can get biblical about it. Any character in the Bible, anyone that we consider a great leader of any kind in the Bible, they were humble individuals. You don't find the kings saving the day. You find the carpenters, the slaves, the workers. They're saving the day.
Yeah, the Arthurian legend. Arthur.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Exactly right. I think that's what made. That's also what makes these movies so alluring. People save the day. Normal people save the day,
and they're so ripe for parable. And I think there's the idea of saving the day could matter on that level. I think you could say the same for Ash from Evil Dead, very average, everyday schmo who gets involved in all this madness. And although he's played more for humor, Reggie is as well. But there's this whole thing that if you look at the horror pantheon, they may be the only two positive kind of schlub role models that there are. I mean, they're not the bad guy. I mean, the original Frankenstein monster would be another one that is innocent. But for the most part, you don't usually have these characters where they're proactive, even if they're not that intelligent, even if they're not doing, the Lord's work, they're just out there and they're stuck in it. It's almost like the anti-hero stuff that Carpenter used to do.
That's the archetype. You have your hero and you have your anti-hero. It's Han Solo. It's the good criminal. It's the guy who reforms. He's not perfect, and he doesn't wear the white hat throughout the whole show. He reforms somewhere. And so the anti-hero in so many of these, and Bruce Campbell was brilliant in it. You can really attach yourself to Bruce Campbell, to Reggie Bannister, to so many of these types. If you want to get classy about it, that's the reason we love Tom Hanks. Tom Hanks is not the great chiseled jawed hero. He's just the guy who, he's Forrest Gump. He's just trying to help, he's trying to help out life. So that's what makes it so alluring. Great comment about the anti-hero. You're absolutely right.
So we were talking about these wonderful experiences that we have at conventions. So we should probably talk about the convention a little bit.
Please.
So, Phoenix FearCon. Tell us a little bit about, we have this whole idea that I mentioned about making it an interactive event for horror artists themselves, and also where we're able to talk about the highs and the lows of creation, but also making it an entertaining event. What can you tell us a little bit about what people can expect at FearCon if you walk into it?
Phoenix FearCon, what really impressed me about it, and this is my second year with Phoenix FearCon, is that it is not just a commercial event. I have been to many conventions, and there's nothing wrong with them. They're a blast, where it's just, okay, the fans are meeting the monster guys, and it's great, and then you could buy memorabilia. It's wonderful. Those are the marketplace sort of conventions, and those are terrific, and I love them. But this goes one step deeper. This is for the audience, and this is for the industry also. You're not just hearing about the successful filmmaker, you're hearing about the emerging artist and their new film. You're hearing what it takes now to get distribution, to get published, to get cast. You're getting people who are working in this industry, and they're telling you what they did in their lives. So yes, you are meeting the stars. You're getting to meet them. You're going to take a picture with them. You're going to get, there's memorabilia. You're going to get autographs, the commercial aspect. But then those who want to really learn, there are young filmmakers there that are going to tell you, hi, this is my second horror movie and it's in distribution, and let me tell you all about it. Last year, I interviewed the cast of Followed, which became the #1 film during pandemic.
Yeah.
And it was a horror film, and it was an independent film that was made by emerging artists. So you're not just saying, okay, let's meet Boris Karloff, let's meet Bela Lugosi, we're meeting these young artists who are tomorrow's John Carpenters, tomorrow's George Romeros. So as an industry professional, you're learning so much more. And as a fan, and this goes down to what I've always appreciated, you're learning the ins and outs of these movies. I think that's what made Famous Monsters of Filmland so appealing. We saw a picture of Karloff on this, as the monster, but then you also saw Karloff with a drink in his hand and a straw, back after he was done. This is arousing. This is an interactive thing where you're right there, you're meeting these fans. They're classic films. This is the 90th anniversary of Dracula, the Universal film, and Frankenstein, and the 80th anniversary of The Wolfman.
Yeah.
So Universal films will be there, and memorabilia from Universal, but you're also going to see brand new movies that are out there. This is a film festival as well as a convention. So you're seeing dozens of new films as part of this. So when you said about, trying to find the new movie, you're going to find about 20 of them over that weekend. And that's the big thing that really sold me on Phoenix FearCon. They're going to have Phoenix FearCon TV. And what it is, the website's going to become its own streaming service. And so for 3 months after the convention, there is going to be films that will be played on there. There will be other interviews. There will be other videos and other panels and other guests. It's basically a television station, a limited run television station for the new horror film. And I think that's combining today's technology with the love of the past. It's anyone can be there. Someone as old as I am can be there. But the next 12-year-old can come into that room and meet the next Peter Cushing. And I think that's amazing.
Yeah, that's what I truly love about film festivals. And that's another reason why I was really excited by this, that this is a hybridization of a couple of different things. And, I've been to some where that doesn't quite work, where all they do is just have a little closet where they put DVDs on. But the idea of actually being able to speak to the artists is what I go to these things for. And I love doing that because so many people who are creating films and they go to festivals, that's the only time that they get any kind of feedback. That's where they get to be heard. And I love watching their films to see what's there and then commenting on that and trying to find what their voice was and how they get completely caught up in answering those questions, because they did this for a purpose. They did not go through all the pain that it takes to make an indie film that may not ever be seen outside of festivals because of whatever problems that there might be financially. It's such a thing to give people that outlet. We do these things, these compulsions, for a specific reason. It's scratching some specific itch for each and every person. And when we're able to have a communal celebration of that, I'm always excited by it. So you did, this is your second year. You had year one, which could have been the make or break. You could have just walked away, but something compelled you to come for number two. What was the moment, the goosebump moment, where you said, this is interesting?
Really simple in this case. It's going to be live and it's going to be virtual. It was virtual last year for obvious reasons. And I had this amazing time because I basically sat in my office with a backdrop and interviewed all these wonderful people and viewed all these films and wrote about it and had a wonderful time from my screen. But the dream, my 12-year-old kid in me dream of going back there and standing where Forey stood, now it happens this year. So when Chris McLennan, who does so much of this by herself, I'm surprised she's not laying on the floor right now hyperventilating. When she said, "Come on down to Phoenix and do it live," I was like, and there it is. It's finally going to happen. The TARDIS has landed, and I'm going back to when I was 12, and it's absolutely incredible. It's really incredible. I'm so glad you said what you said about the filmmakers getting feedback. There's the line in Hamlet where the ghost of King Hamlet says to Prince Hamlet, he says, "Adieu, adieu, remember me." He could have said, "Avenge me." He could have said, "Take care of me." He could have said, "Help me," whatever. He said, "Remember me." And these filmmakers, you're absolutely right. They've spent every dollar. They've spent every minute. They have walked the tightrope to get this movie done, to be able to play it and stand there while an audience cheers, and then to hear the fans say, "This was great," or even, dare I say, "Hey, do more of this, fix this." How valuable is that to a filmmaker in terms of his art? I think it's incredible. We have one of the most excited panels that we're going to have there has the directors and the producers of Terrifier and Terrifier 2, as well as The Dark Offerings, and a film called Alone, which when I first saw it, I told the filmmaker, I said, "You have a horror movie here." And he said, And it's funny, you were talking before about adding horror to something. This was a film about if the COVID virus won, and we see our society essentially ending in this film. And when I said to the filmmaker, you have a horror movie here, he said, I do. and then he sat on a panel. We videoed a panel of him with other individuals from other horror films, and he just said, wow, it is. And his mind is now opened to the notion of horror films. And he writes me all the time. His name's Roy Shalef, and he writes me all the time. And he says, I can't wait to get there. This is going to be very exciting. This is going to be very exciting. It opened up his mind to the legitimacy and the power of the horror film. And if we could do that to the entire audience, if we can do that to all the filmmakers there, that's a win-win. That's the home run.
Oh, yeah. I've been to a few film festivals, some that are all full-length films and some that have a short film area as well. And the short films are really intriguing because you can really catch the thing that makes that person unique. I had been in some of the shows, and I'm watching, and there have been times where oh my God, especially around the torture porn, when that really hit, when Saw hit, and it's like I just spent hours watching people tied to chairs, and I'm like, oh God, will this ever end? And then all of a sudden there was this really weird, creepy kind of mixture between horror and sexuality. Somebody put a piece of themselves out there. They weren't mimicking the thing that was popular in the theater. They put something personal, like Freudian, up on that screen. And when I saw that, I said, I gotta say something after this. This is the creepiest moment. Maybe no one else is watching this thing. It's kind of all over the place in its own way, but this is a nugget. And so that person's gone on to start making more films. But I remember the energy that there was of saying, listen, I need to tell you, this is the most original thing that I've watched all day. The whole thing about, and it had to do with nipples and stuff. And it was just really strange. It was like a child's fear of sex coming out on this thing. And I was like, that's the most fascinating thing that I've seen all weekend. And I hope that I encourage you to go down that area. You may have people who will tell you to shut the fuck up. But at the same point, I will say that I think this is the stuff that's daring. And do you think that there's anywhere right now that the metaphor of horror isn't touching that it should be? That uncomfortable spot that you wish that horror was touching more on?
Political drama. I think we are... any horror film where there's a despot, where there is a tyrant or anything like that, it is either all the way outlandishly overdone almost to the sci-fi total range, or it's comedic, like Idiocracy was.
Right.
We are in a world now where, because of recent events, we are able to really see what governments do, what politics are capable of, and you can fill in the blanks there, good or bad. And I think to have a legitimate horror film that shows absolute power corrupting absolutely. I think to myself, that's why Denzel Washington's doing Macbeth right now, because it's absolute power corrupting absolutely. But even there, it's the demons, it's the witches, it's the dark forces that are doing it to him. To show the corruption of a good person, or even the corruption, or even the successful continuous corruption of a nefarious individual. I think that's things we really need to see. You brought up something interesting when you were talking about that unique film. These are our nightmares. Horror films are our nightmares, and these brave souls who make these movies are taking our nightmares and putting them on the screen. Rod Serling suffered from nightmares, and he kept a tape recorder at the side of his bed, and he'd wake up in the middle of the night, he'd recite the nightmare, close the tape recorder, go back to sleep. He wouldn't remember it in the morning, but he'd play it back, and it became the Twilight Zone.
Yeah.
These people that take their nightmares, these are all of our nightmares. Our brain, we have this animal brain. So our fear simply is, I hope I get to work on time. But our brain's fear, the animal fear, turns that into something so devastating. So these horror movies do that. So imagine a filmmaker who takes something like the safety of a country and plays it for reality that way. I think that would be really devastating today. Everything else, I think, it's been touched, and And thank you, Jordan Peele. We're seeing racism become a topic of horror movies. We've seen since the days of Hammer, we've seen what happens when the female of the species becomes the aggressor. So many things have been touched. I think now it's time to take some matters that we think, oh, we can't talk about that. Yeah, let's talk about that in a horror film.
Yeah, I agree. I think that there is a need. So I was just on a show where they asked me, is there anything that shouldn't be made into a film? I said, well, I don't think there's anything that shouldn't be made into a film. I think you should be, but you should be ready because you're leaving yourself wide open. Yeah. You can't just go there and then assume that it's okay and nobody has the right to say anything about it, or you hope nobody gets beaten up over this stuff. But I did say, if you make a movie and someone sees you in a restaurant and they pour cold water in your lap because they're offended by the film, I think you have to be ready for that. You are going after I think that's what it's here for. I tell people that if you want to know what really made the anxieties sing, what the anxieties really were in any decade, go back to the exploitation films. Go back to the bad horror movies. Those are the ones that needed to know exactly what wound to poke because they needed to get middle America upset. They may have been crass. They may have been very on the nose, but that's what you were really afraid of. Not what the prestige film told you, not even sometimes what the great horror movie told you. Sometimes it's the one that just was right there down and dirty. And I think of that down and dirtiness, that sense of danger is in comedy and it's also in horror. And I think they both take us to a place where the element of surprise, we exercise either in a scream or in a laugh. It's the thing that we don't want to have happen to us, or the thing that we would never do in a million years. Comedies, I would never do it in a million years. We get to see that happen. And horror is, I never want that to happen to me, but I'm willing to curiously take a look at it. I think we're there. I think another thing is sexuality. I talk a lot about how horror movies, their nudity and violence. People call it sex and violence, but really we barely touch on sexuality. We talk on a very, very simple, straight, I'm not going to offend anybody sexuality. And we're starting to see it move a little bit more into the grayer areas or the more disturbing areas. And I think at this point, so much anger is about identity, and sexual identity being one. And I think we've talked Invasion of the Body Snatchers about identity and our identity as a person, as a philosophical being. I think the next thing might be what happens when sexual identity really starts to get, we're nervous about it already. Why not exploit it? I'm intrigued that we haven't seen as much hitting on that. It may be too soon, it may be too late. I don't know. But I think that there's something that I feel is just starting to roll. We've had so much anger over something that is almost ephemeral. And I think that there's something really interesting about our responses to that I think horror should be exploiting. Clive Barker did it back in the 80s. And really, no one has really carried that ball since then. But I think politics, a very interesting thing. I've also loved to see somebody talk about how politics, what used to be considered social issues, have slowly been mutated into political issues.
Right. Yes.
And I think that's a really scary story. That, I mean, I have the right, really, to tell you that your political thing, well, that's just a philosophical difference. A social problem, on the other hand, we should be working together for. So taking social issues and turning them into political issues allows for a my way or highway kind of thinking. Yeah. And I think that's taking us in a disturbing place. But I mean, that's horror for another time.
It's funny you say about sexual issues. I think you're right, and I think we're scared to talk about it. And horror films way sexual. But the wrong sexual, if I can be so bold, they go for the pornographic. They go for, okay, how fast can the girl get naked and then get killed? This is not, there were some moments, Dracula's Daughter, which has veiled lesbianism in it. Yeah. There's a gay theme in one of the Nightmare on Elm Streets. I think it's Nightmare on Elm Street 2. Mm-hmm. And back then, the movie was pushed away because of it, but now it's being re-examined. Hammer Films, for heaven's sake, back to my favorites, Dr. Jekyll and Sister Hyde.
Yeah, right.
And Frankenstein created woman. As much as we look at these and we say, oh, come on. But again, it's the notion of the male-female dichotomy. It's been there, but I think you're right. I think we need to take it to a very serious level. We need to take it to a very strong level. It shouldn't just be about how fast do we see titties. Pardon me. It's
right.
Let's talk about sexuality, not sex.
I think the thing is that it's always been some form of titillation, as opposed to what I think. I think Cronenberg kind of did it too because of body horror. He couldn't help but start talking about sexuality in a way. What makes me me? And I'm laughing because I'm wearing my bride shirt, which I always wear. It's my good luck shirt whenever I'm doing these. And so, I think there has always been message in films, in horror films specifically, because they are tailor-made for allegory and metaphor and parable. And I think that the things that are talked about, why I asked before about whether or not we felt that we know what our metaphors are now, or if we have to find that out later, is I think it does change. I think James Whale had a certain mindset when he was making his films. I was going to bring him up.
I was going to bring him up, your T-shirt and everything. There is, you get the idea that Dr. Pretorius in Bride of Frankenstein has a crush on Dr. Frankenstein. Yeah. Firstly, the way Ernest Thesiger played him was one allusion toward it. And secondly, there's that great line which disappears when he goes into Frankenstein's bedroom. When he goes into Dr. Frankenstein's bedroom, he says something to him, and his wife is there, Elizabeth is there, and he leaves. He says, "I leave you to a marriage bed," and he leaves. You can really see and his only weakness. There is such the connection in there, and considering the way each character was played in that, the fact that they were all creating a woman,
right,
and they
reject,
set in motion,
right?
Thank you. And they set in motion something ironic that one could see in the 80s movies. Part of the reason I think we have the sexuality that we do in so many 80s movies and beyond is because of that Frankenstein, the monster. When they did Karloff, he's a monster. He has the flat head, and it's gruesome. Boris Karloff actually had to have teeth removed so that his skull would look distended. There was so much done to him to make him monstrous. But I don't know, the bride looked pretty good to me. Okay, a wacky hairstyle, but nonetheless, she was beautiful. So we already started this image of the monster and the beautiful girl. And I think that just carried all the way through to the 80s.
Yeah, I think we're going to have great conversations in the desert. I can't wait to get there. I'm going to be doing live podcasts at sea.
Oh, I can't wait. I can't wait to meet you. I can't wait for you to chat with everybody. I can't wait to chat with you there. It's going to be phenomenal.
Yeah, I can't wait. It's going to be magnificent. And I want to thank you so much for giving me so much of your time, Jay. I know we've gone a little bit over an hour.
Please, can I just plug where people need to go?
This is what we're looking for.
www.phoenixfearcon.com, phoenixfearcon.com. You will be able to register for FearCon TV. You'll be able to get tickets to the event itself. You will see a listing as to the multitude. I think we're up to 36 guests and panelists and everything. We have everyone from Terry Alexander from Romero's Day of the Dead to Reggie Bannister, to Al Going Back and John Skip, and so many famous authors and directors and writers. And we have a ton of new films that are going to be there. And we have the filmmakers there. So if you see a movie and you'll love it, go down the hall, there's the filmmaker, and you'll be able to talk to them. And it's a joyous atmosphere. There's immersive events there. There's going to be Bill Oberst, and I've mentioned him many times. He's going to be doing his one-man show based on Ray Bradbury's story. Right. So you have a live performance there. There are several film premieres of established films already. There's plenty of memorabilia. There's an entire memorabilia room. There's an autograph room. There are food trucks everywhere, and everything's named after something ghoulish. Like when you buy a drink, it's in a blood bag, for heaven's sake. There's interactive behavior where you get to fight zombies. You are never sitting still for this. And it's in sunny Arizona. And from what I hear in October, it's lovely out there. So if you're like where I am, if you're in New York and the fall is coming, guess what? You can go back to the summer just for a little. I'm going back to being 12 in the summer in Phoenix, Arizona, October 15 and 16. PhoenixFearCon.com.
Absolutely. And both nights go till midnight, the witching hour.
Right.
So it's going to be an awful lot of fun. I love the idea of it going all night, or not all night, but all day into the night, because that's almost like a sleepover. And that also makes it kind of fun. And I can't wait to see everybody.
And I'm gonna plug this also. If you hear me on Scott's really brilliant podcast, I've listened to episodes. This man knows what he's talking about. Please listen to him. If you've seen me on there, come and meet me over there. Say hi. I heard you on Scott's show, and I'll walk you around and introduce you to some of the celebrities there personally. So if you hear this telecast, telecast, find me, and I'll take good care of you at the convention.
That's absolutely wonderful. I may take you up on that. Well, Jay Michaels, thank you so much for giving me some of your time. Thank you for being an emissary of horror and an emissary of this convention. And I also want to thank everybody who's out there listening. If you're listening to Hellbent for Horror, just remember that I am here to remind you that you used to love horror movies and you secretly still do. And remember to stay hellbent. And thanks for listening to the show. Hellbent for Horror was written and broadcast by me, S.A. Bradley, and produced by me and Lisa Gorski. You can find more on our website, hellbentforhorror.com, and I'm also on Facebook at facebook.com/Hellbent for Horror, and my Twitter handle is Hellbent Horror. Please hit that subscribe button to get H4H hot off the press. And if you can do a review on iTunes or whatever app you listen to us on, that really helps people get to find us. And now for some Hellbent for Horror news. The podcast is available on some more outlets now, so you can listen to H4H on Spotify, iHeartRadio, and TuneIn Radio, as well as the regular iTunes, Android, and Amazon apps. And let there be swag. H4H t-shirts are now on sale. We have a store on tpublic.com with a bunch of Hellbent for Horror designs, and you can have your choice of t-shirts, sweatshirts, hoodies, coffee mugs, something horrible beautiful for you or that someone special. The link to the merchandise store is on our website, hellbentforhorror.com. And until we meet again, stay hellbent.